Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of BrickSide Chat, where we take your questions and turn them into conversations. I'm Evan.
And I'm Paul.
And today we are answering the question, should I start a small business?
And basically, the answer is no. No, it's a lot more complicated than that. But basically, if you aren't already, in the mindset of there's a specific thing that I specifically want to do, then, the answer is probably more towards no. But if you have an idea and you're trying to consider, should I start this small business? Well, hopefully we will provide you with some guidance throughout the course of this episode.
Yeah. So this morning we're kind of building out an outline for this. And we started with a little section that was like kind of ask yourself. And then we put a few questions in there. So I think the entire episode actually is going to be kind of staged as a question. And then we'll go into that question as to what the answer could or should not be. And then kind of what the decision is from that. So I think the first thing when it comes to someone who's looking into starting a small business, the big thing you need to obviously pick is what is the business that you're making. And, in our case, we sell individual Lego parts. But it really doesn't matter what the small business is. You could be a contractor that builds cabinets. You could be a small animal like pet shop or something.
New thing, be an AI startup business.
Yeah, you could be really anything.
Now that crypto's not hot.
The question is, when you're picking what you want to do for your business, or maybe you have an idea already, you need to ask yourself, do you like this business idea? And not just like short term, but really, do you see yourself doing this business or this task all the time, especially considering that like over the course of however long this business runs, you're not always gonna be just so happy every single day. You're gonna have hard times in the business. And do you want to be doing this task when the times are bad?
And I think kind of a secondary thing onto that is, can you do this task even when you don't want to? Because there are times, I love working in the store. I love the store. But there are so many times where I just don't want to, but we still got to go in and do it. And so you got to ask yourself, is this task something that I can do, that I can is it something that it's within my capability to force myself to do during those times where I don't want to? But you really should be passionate about it most of the time.
Right. And do you see yourself getting sick of this thing after 1 year? There's obviously, with a business and being the business owner, there are so many things you need to do, countless things really. So you need to, obviously, there's going to be some things that you're not going to like, but overall you should be enjoying, I think, what you're doing. Yeah. And if maybe you're getting into the business mindset of, I don't want to run this business for 20 years, but I want to build this business for the first 3, 4, 5 years, and then I want to sell it. Maybe then at that point you can kind of decide, I actually don't really want to, maybe this isn't my favorite task, but for example, I feel fine if I'm going to sell it in 5 years. I can stand this for 5 years to then sell it to someone else, versus I want to run this thing for the next 15, 20 years as my, job / owner of a business, and you better love it. Which it's going to be a bad 20 years.
Which does kind of bring into something that we were talking about earlier, and this is more for another episode, but I do want to just touch on it real quick, which is the difference between a business owner and someone who's self-employed. If you let's say write copy articles, which are just random news articles, stuff like that. You're a freelancer and you do that for a ton of different people. Even if you make really good money doing it, that I would hesitate to call that a business. Now, if you have people working for you, or you have this whole infrastructure and branding, that's probably more of a business. But it's about whether you're taking profit out or whether you're just taking salary for your hours. Right. Is there more left over at the end than you are putting in? Yeah.
There's two things. You might, your business could be making a great amount of money and stuff, but you're not really super profitable. You're just meeting your expenses and stuff, but you're getting paid. You're making a salary and stuff. At that point, you're really not a business owner. Sure, you have the responsibility of all that, but at the end of the day, you're really just an employee for yourself. Versus a business owner, maybe not the main reason, but a reason that at some point, in your business, you'd like to be pulling out a share of that profit, the owner's share. And that, I think, is really a business owner, when your business is profitable and you're now accepting not only hopefully your salary, but also that profit share at the end.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, we're not there yet. And it usually takes 5 years, I think, before, on average, obviously it depends, but it's usually 5 years before a business is actually profitable, paying out like a share of profits to people. And it really depends on the business, because if it takes you 5 years to grow, and then you've hit your point, then you might be at that profit. But if your intention is for 10 years to continue growing, then that profit becomes a little more questionable.
Well, and the other thing is, also what you're considering your salary to be, because you could up your salary to $500,000 and there'd be very little. I mean, obviously, that gets into a lot of tax questions, since that's not at all what I'm trying to hint at here. But, you could set a extremely high salary and have less profit because of that. But I'm kind of talking about normal cases here,
right,
where you're meeting your living expenses and you're paying everyone, and there's still money left over at the end of the year.
Right. So yeah, I guess to recap that little section, pick a business or a topic or a thing that you want to do, whether maybe you're selling things, maybe you love the concept of having inventory and having a retail shop of some sort, maybe you absolutely love building cabinetry and that's like your passion and you can sell it to people, whatever it is.
You really want to start a cabinetry
apparently
business?
This cabinet thing, yeah, I don't know what, but yeah, pick something that you really enjoy or that you can at least foresee yourself doing for the future. Pretty much, just to really sum it up, just don't pick a task that you hate unless your intention is to only do it for 2 or 3 years and then pass it off.
What is kind of a reason, kind of piggybacking off of that so even if you're passionate about something, there's kind of a big reason as to why someone might want to start a business about something they're passionate about, but it's really not the best decision. And that's that you currently do that thing for your living right now, working for someone else, and you hate your boss, or you hate your work environment, or you hate your coworker, or there's something about the specific situation that you're in that you just cannot tolerate. And so you decide, screw this, I'm going to go do it on my own. And lots of great businesses start that way, when someone sees an inefficiency that they think they can fix. But you really need to be upset by a lack of innovation, right? You need to be looking at this and saying, there's something that I can change, not just for myself, but for the whole industry. If you want to, branch off like that, it's probably going to be more worth your time to go find another employer doing the same thing if your only issue is that you don't like your workplace.
Right. Yeah. If it's a simple thing where your boss is, an a-hole,
yeah,
and that's the reason you hate your job every day or whatever it is, then it may not be best for you to start your own thing unless you really want to. If you've had that desire since before you realize you didn't enjoy your boss and the way he treats you or whatever it is, then maybe it is a good idea to start. But if you haven't had that idea and you're thinking of it only because you don't enjoy working for someone, not that that's a bad red flag or anything, but I think you need to really think and assess. If I just work for a different company that treats me better, would I actually be happier? You'd have less stress, most likely. You're not relying or dealing with that concept of you are part of the reason that your entire thing may fail. You don't have other people relying on you. So it'd be a lot easier just to change companies you work for, potentially, if that's an option. Because
also you are going to be a way worse boss than the boss you're working for. And I'm not saying in terms of skill. You might be excellent for the people that work for you.
Yeah.
I'm just saying to yourself, unless you're a Zen master who lives out on the mountain, right, and has just mastered self-control perfectly, you're going to be an awful manager. Evan is an awful manager of himself. I'm an awful manager of himself. Yeah, I don't know anyone that's an excellent manager of themselves.
You will, when you start your own business, you will have the worst boss just because it's you. And managing yourself is very difficult.
Yeah. So
people learn how to do it, but there's a reason there are managers and people that are accountable to other people and all this stuff.
And it's not just in terms of, I'm a very motivated person, I'm not going to slack off. That can also make you a bad boss for yourself, because you might overwork to the point where a year later, we talked about this a lot last episode, but you're just too burned out to continue. And I'm sorry to say that makes you a bad manager. And so, at least of yourself. So, that's something to keep in mind too.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a question. Obviously, with specifically the thing we are doing, in terms of selling individual Lego parts, there's very few companies that have a large amount of employees who may leave and want to start their own thing. I've heard of it happening. We do know it has happened, but overall, it's very unlikely. Very successful,
yeah.
Well, and it's very unlikely that someone's going to be working and be like, oh, I'm going to go do this just because I think I can do it better, because it's a weird little thing. But obviously, if you're looking for something like you want to start a grocery store.
That's a rough one.
That's an interesting one. But, you want to do something like that. That might be
your cabinet shop.
Or a cabinet shop. I feel like most cabinet things are small businesses. So it's like you probably don't have a lot of people working for you. I don't know. True. But, think if you really want to start a business completely, or if you just want that freedom that you think you don't have in the current workplace and you can actually find it somewhere else. The next big question when you're asking yourself, should I start a business or do I want to start a business and stuff? You've now, let's say, picked your topic or your business, the thing you do. I don't know what that's called. You've picked what your business sells, or your product or whatever that is. You really need to go out there and make sure you do the research and stuff to verify that you have potential customers and that you're filling a gap in the market. You don't want to look at a place and see that the market is like, let's say I want to start my cabinet thing. We're just going to go with this through the whole thing since we're on this now. I want to start a little cabinet store, shop thing, whatever. I build my own cabinets and sell them to people, or I do custom kitchen cabinets. If I go out there and I realize there's a ton of cabinet makers who have years of experience and they're not getting enough work because there's too many of them in this area, and a lot of them are having to travel really far to get jobs and stuff, or the area right now no one's remodeling because of an economic, whatever the reason might be, then it might not be a good idea for me to start my cabinet business. You need to make sure there's those customers out there and that you're not completely continuing to oversaturate a market that's already oversaturated.
Now, something on that is if you have a solution. Now, that was talking a lot about oversaturation. But if you have a solution or an innovation, obviously you can make some flex room there. But then you need to find out whether what you think, and I'm going to come across as a little deprecating a lot of this podcast, but you need to find out that whether what you think is an innovation is actually an innovation, or whether it's something that no one does because it doesn't work.
Yeah, you need to do your market research, see if it's something that people are in need of, and if it's something you could potentially patent and like protect and all that kind of stuff. Versus I just make kitchen cabinets and I paint mine blue. Woohoo, and no one wants blue cabinets or something.
Well, because the thing about taking that as an example is if I start painting my cabinets blue, and suddenly they start selling off the shelves, everyone else who has a way bigger business already and all of those employees is going to be able to do it way better than you. And really all you've done is kind of shoot yourself, in the foot there. So
yeah,
be careful.
If you create a kitchen cabinet hinge that allows somehow for the door to open in a different way where it makes your cabinets all look like it's one flat seamless surface or whatever. I don't know. I don't know if that'd be sellable or people would want that, but I'm sure it exists as well. But like if that was a new thing in the market and all of a sudden it allowed for a totally different look of a kitchen and you patented this hinge that allowed you to do that, maybe now you're creating a product that people would be interested in because you've created something new. You've innovated within that market. Even if it's already quite saturated, you now have a unique thing specific to you that if you do patent it or whatever you do, other people can't just take from you.
Correct.
Versus if you have no product, you just want to start making cabinets. And that's another question that we'll kind of lean towards now is just, is this something that can be profitable in general? Or is this just something you want to do because it sounds fun? And that's something we've struggled with a little bit for a while. We had this at the beginning where it was like, we invested a decent chunk of change in the beginning. Not really when you're looking at a big business or anything, but for us 3 years ago, whatever, that was a lot of money. Frankly, it still is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Obviously, we didn't put it in one pool from the very beginning. It was like over the course of 6 months or whatever, but we spent a good chunk of change, and a lot of that at the time, to be totally honest, was probably not with the exact thought that this is going to return like crazy. It was actually a lot of like, we want to do this because it's fun right now. And we don't, we've gotten ourselves out of that trap now, and we've realized there's certain ways we need to spend money and all these things and build a budget, yada, yada, yada. But that's the thing at the beginning you don't want to do, is just do something because it sounds fun, and then later on realize, oh crap, I can't make money doing this. I just wasted 40 grand or whatever. and we've definitely had those moments where it's like, why did we buy this? Oh, because it's cool. Huh. Okay. Well, it doesn't do anything for us or whatever it is.
Yet we still have not bought chairs.
No, that's yeah. So we have no chairs in the garage.
No.
But we have, a really bad chair. It's like 50 something years old.
I think it was my great grandparents. Yeah.
Oh, actually? Yeah. I don't know. It's a really old chair. And it's not comfortable whatsoever. It doesn't have wheels. It's not consistent. It's heavy. It's like solid wood. Inconvenient. And for probably 2 years, we've talked about, we just need to buy a couple chairs that have a back and they're like standing height, or like the height of the standing counters and stuff.
Good chairs are a lot of money.
And we've never done that.
Because actually, we did buy chairs, I think. Aren't the chairs in storage? Did we buy those? Or
no, those were given to us. And those are
awful.
no better.
That's why those are worse.
Are they worse? They might be. No. Because we used those a lot more than we used the white one.
But they kind of fall apart.
That's what ended up happening. After a year of use, they fell apart. But we don't have good chairs. But don't buy things that are useless. We've said this a lot throughout the channel, and we might have mentioned it in another one of these episodes. Just don't buy things that seem fun. But in the beginning, that's a mistake we for sure made. So try not to just have a business because it sounds fun versus you realizing that a business should make you money, and you don't want to get 2 years in and be like, oh, I'm not making any money because this can't make money. I'm just enjoying and having fun. Unless it's like getting you by. If it's getting you by and you're having fun and you're not overly stressed, it might be worth it. But if you have the intention to grow and make profit and all that stuff, and you can't do that.
Yeah, and that returns us to the self-employed. There's nothing wrong with being self-employed. If one of your reasons for starting a business is to be able to say, hey, I did this, honestly, being able to support yourself off of a hobby, even if it's not growing, is still really impressive.
Totally.
And most people, if you just tell them, I paint figures for a living, are still going to be so impressed that you are talented enough to make a full-time income off of that.
Right. And if they don't
care.
If you're making like a comfortable number, whatever that number might be per year, and that's what you need, and you don't want to expand and stuff, then you're doing great. And there's no problem with that. The downside is if you really want to grow a bigger business and then you realize you can't, or you're not profitable for 5 years because you can't be profitable ever, and then you realize then it's kind of late and you're a little stuck. And there's a risk where more than 50%, we looked it up this morning, more than 50% of small businesses fail within the first 5 years. Now 5 years sounds like a long time, but you have to realize that a failure means that they've pulled the plug. So they probably weren't doing well for 4 years, and then that 5th year they all of a sudden weren't doing well. They probably were struggling for those 5 years and then finally gave up, and that's the failure point at which they called it. But I think, what were the other stats? I think it was like...
It was six, only
25% of businesses last longer than 15 years or something like that.
I think that was it.
And I think 65 fail within the first 10 years.
Yeah, and it was 18% fail within the first year, I think, something like that.
Yeah, I think that was it.
Yeah.
25 within the first 2 years, 50 within 5.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Now, something you do need to understand is this is a statistic that I'm remembering from a business class I took in school, so I don't want to
I thought you looked it up.
Oh, no. That statistic I did look up. But the statistic I'm about to say, I'm remembering from a textbook, so I could be a little wrong. But most in the modern economic the modern economic cycle is such a fast boom bust that expecting your business to last 15 years, unless you're a small family-owned restaurant, is unrealistic, even if you are running a huge company. Like most Fortune 500 companies that have not already existed for decades are also not going to last that long. Boom bust cycle is so fast now that really, if you're looking at growing a larger business, you should be looking at trying to last between 10 and 15 years. But the difference is they sell off all of their assets at a profit after those years. So it's not that they go bankrupt. It's that they decide, I'm going to sell off everything now. Right.
And if you've been operating for that long, you've probably made enough money and profit that you've, for you to then say, I want to start a new thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, you are that, quote, self-employed, where you're not making profit, you're just paying your expenses or that you need or personally, and then you're out of luck come 15 years or whatever. A big question a very big question that has to do with starting a business is, do you have the financing available to start your business? And in addition to not only starting your business, another question is, do you have the financing available to support yourself through the starting of this business? Because your first month of operating, you're not going to, if you do, I mean, people probably do, but very unlikely you're going to make money in your first month to pay yourself to be having worked at your business or whatever. Yeah. Pretty unlikely, especially with all the big costs of the initial startup. So you need to, there's a few options, obviously, when it comes to funding.
I just do want to specify here that we're not professional investors and we don't have any kind of certifications. So any accounting, anything tangentially related to accounting here, we're not CPAs. I just want to say that. I
don't really think I'm getting into accounting, but
no, but I don't want anyone to, take out a loan and blame us.
Yeah. So there's a few options. One, which Paul just said, which is obviously go with a loan. And then there's, of course, a few different options where you can go get loans. You could go to a bank. Now, most likely, you need to have good credit and stuff for this because the business has no credit whatsoever if you're just starting. So they're going to look at something like all your personal loans, your personal credit and stuff, and see if you have enough income. Do you have savings? Whatever. They'll look at that and then they'll decide yes or no, I'm going to give you a loan. And then whatever amount that is as well. You could, of course, there's a lot of specific financial institutions that are not specific to, like, they're not exactly a bank, but they do provide loans where, they provide startup loans and stuff for businesses. A lot of these, they still look at your personal credit because, of course, you have no history for the business, but you can probably have lower credit for these as well. The downside is the interest is usually a lot higher here. And then, of course, there's always like the personal option where you don't really loan money from yourself. I mean, maybe you call it that, but maybe you have $40,000 saved up that it's just burning a hole in your pocket. You don't know what you're going to do with it. You could potentially invest that into your business, or you could go with a personal loan against some other asset that you own. So people I know have in the past taken out like a home equity type loan or something, or they use like that asset of their house as the collateral for a loan, and then they use that money to start their business. And then there's always the friend/family route. Kind of, I don't want to call it crowdfunding, but that concept of reaching out to people that to help invest in the initial startup of your business. Some of that could be a loan, or some of that could be an investment where you're selling shares of a company.
And that is something that I feel like is a little underexplored. Asking for money, at least in America, is kind of, I don't want to speak for other cultures, but going around and just asking people for money is kind of frowned upon. But, they're just going to say no, and they're probably not going to think any less of you for it. And it's not like
you're just saying, hey, I need $2,000. It's like you're asking, hey, I'm looking. You don't just go and say, I need $10,000. You go up and you explain your whole thing. I don't personally think that's frowned upon.
Really?
Not if you have something behind it. If you, I don't even know that it's sad to ask a friend. Like, if you need to borrow $500 or something, it's a little weird, maybe. For depending on who you are, but I don't think there's like a.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's more true. Is that it's more.
There might be a little bit of a stigma with it, just because you hear all these things where someone borrows money from you and then it never gets returned and it ruins friendships and all that kind of stuff. But if you're doing something to start a business, it's not $500 most likely. It's probably significantly more, and you're going to have something. Write it down. Both of you write up a contract, whether it's a single piece of paper that just says, my mom and dad loaned me $20,000 and I'm going to pay it off $500 a month for the next X amount of years, and then you both sign it. Like, that's all you really need. As long as there's something in writing somewhere. You don't want to just borrow $10,000 and be like, I'll pay you back eventually. That's where I think you cause problems. But I don't personally think there's any real issue with asking friends or family for a loan if you have a reason for it and stuff, and you're backing it up with look, I'm going to go do this, this, and this. And I think for the most part, depending on the business you're getting in, the majority of friends and family hopefully would support you.
Which is something that we are going to talk about.
Yeah, and we can hop over to that if you want, because unless you have any other funding options.
Well, you did mention crowdsourcing. Kickstarter does not necessarily have exactly the reputation that it used to. both positively and negatively. They're a lot more strict nowadays than they used to be back in the days of those big YouTuber scandals where someone would make this video about all of these people who took thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on Kickstarter. But if you have an idea that you're very confident about, you can crowdsource it and give away something. I think that's probably going to work way more on creative ventures than saying like, hey, I want to start XYZ, because I'm not sure that you can give equity or shares as a Kickstarter reward.
Probably not, but you can start a business with that. The business itself isn't started, but if you like create a product that is the sole focus of your business, you create, let's say, a robot that does something for you, that you can crowdsource that product, and then that is your product, and obviously your business you deal with there, but that product is the reason your business makes money. A lot of people do that, and then you just give away the robot if they spend enough money, which is essentially your sales. If you watch Shark Tank and stuff, a lot of them started off and they create some product or something, and they start off with like, the sharks always ask, what's your investment, how, whatever, and they're always, not always, but some of them are like, oh, we crowdfunded $200,000, which then sold 700 units, or whatever. So that's very common too. So that's always an option as well. For something like we do, that wouldn't have been an option. Doesn't really make sense for how we would have done that. But if you have a specific product, that for sure could be an option. Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically. I mean, there's one thing that I do want to quickly address, and I do feel. I mean, it's probably true in almost any business community, but within our community, the BrickLink community, I've noticed it's very true, is spending averse behavior.
Definitely.
You have to spend money to make money. I can't think of any exceptions. You can spend very little money and compensate with other things, but at the end of the day, you have a service or a product that you are expending, and that service or product came from somewhere in its constituent parts, and those things cost money. So even if you are writing something online, you have a laptop that cost money, right? So even if the business isn't necessarily paying, you have invested money into it.
Yeah, that's true.
Basically you can spend more time and less money, or more money and less time, I think would kind of...
Probably, yeah. And you can, of course, always count your time towards the money.
Yeah.
I think that is something that a lot of people don't do in the beginning. We definitely didn't do it in the beginning, where it was like not that we truly have an equivocate to what 1 hour of our work is right now, but because obviously every week fluctuates in terms of the amount of work we do. But for the most part, like, your time is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can outsource something, but that's going to cost you money, or you can do it yourself and that's going to cost you time. And it's essentially the same thing, but obviously sometimes you may have more time available than cash.
Yeah. I guess the big point I'm trying to drive here is, if you're going to buy something that's going to save you a lot of time, then if you have the ability to purchase it, you probably should.
Yeah. And like, that's something we did.
The cart
we did. The carts, obviously, I mean, that was going to happen regardless, but we purchased a counting scale, like right at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Probably not worth it right then, but in terms of the amount of time it saved us eventually, a lot. Now we've purchased multiple counting scales that we give out to people and stuff that they use as an asset for them to do things. But, that was an example of something where it might've been a little early, but technically it saved time. Today it's still saving time. It wasn't like an investment that was only a 1 month long thing. It did last for a while. And kind of the last thing with that financing, I guess, is going back to that question of, are you just doing this because you want to? Let's say you had 20 grand and you're going to put that 20 grand into a business, and you need to expect that you may never see that 20 grand ever again. Hopefully you do. That would be the real goal here.
Well, I don't know about expect. I think it's more you need to accept, because hopefully,
sure.
Because if you're, Evan talked to me about this earlier. If you're expecting failure, then you have a higher chance of failure if you're expecting failure. I think it's more that you need to accept.
Yeah, you need to be okay with it, I guess, is really what I meant. with that concept of that your 20 grand you might put in, you may not get back. And you need to be okay with that just in case that does happen. Another thing you need to think about is if you do take out a loan or something, if you need a $50,000 loan to start your business and your business goes under in the next 6 months because it just can't make it, your loan, I'm sure, is not paid off. So are those payments on your loan going to ruin you? Do you have a way to go get another job to continue paying that? Whatever that is. So think about that as well. And that's a lot, I think, of that. Are you just doing this because you want to, or are you doing this because you think this can make money? And again, not to have anything wrong with doing something that you want to do, but a business at the end of the day needs to make enough money to pay its expenses and ideally be profitable. If you're really not profitable for a long term, there's no way you're going to be able to sustain yourself. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely a big thing there. This is one that we kind of talked about last time, so I don't think we need to get too far into it, but when you're asking yourself if you're good to start a business or you want to start a business, who's going to motivate you to keep going? Are you a self-motivated person? When things get tough, can you continue to push through, et cetera, et cetera? You and I are fortunate where we have each other when if something is rough, or one of us, for whatever reason, 1 week isn't doing a ton of work because we're being lazy or whatever, we feel that responsibility to the other person.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're the sole person working at your business, you're making your cabinets and you need to get out there and make sales and stuff, there's not going to be anything motivating you to get sales if you just feel like, I don't want to do it today.
Yeah, we go see the previous
right. The last episode 5, we talked about motivation.
Something on that we didn't touch on a lot last time, which is, well, first I'll say nobody has ever straight up told me, nobody whose opinion I care about anything has ever told me your business is a failure or you are not going to succeed or anything aggressive like that. I mean, occasionally we get comments on YouTube, but those are more for entertainment. But it's more, you need to be able to deal with people who are just going to be like, oh, I wish you luck. And you can just tell that they completely believe that you're wasting your time, right? And that's almost harder to deal with than people who are going to be aggressive towards you, because one, that's so rare. And also if someone is like coming at you like, oh, you're so worthless, oh, whatever, it's kind of easy to, I guess, laugh at that, because that's just like such a stupid thing.
Right.
But, constantly experiencing people where you can just tell by talking about the business, and not that they're not interested, because lots of people aren't going to be interested, but just that they think it's foolish, or they doubt you, or they're like, oh, when are you going to get a real, or that's something I've very rarely heard, when you're going to get a real job, but more like, trying to suggest things your way, like, oh, maybe you should focus more on your degree, or, just little things like that can wear you down after a long time. And so you need to be the kind of person who's going to be able to just persevere through that without getting angry, because there's a reason why most people don't start a business. Most people aren't able to envision that success and push themselves. And so you shouldn't get mad at people who are living a happy life, fulfilled with their current employment when that doesn't work for you, because they're not going to understand your perspective, and you are probably not going to understand their perspective. So you just need to, be able to go, okay, and stay motivated. And so you really truly have to be a self-starter in that sense. It's not just being motivated to continue working. It's surviving in a doubt around you.
Yeah, there's a doubtful atmosphere almost. Yeah. Or potentially doubtful. Everything you do, people aren't going to support you. There's probably, hopefully there's key people in your life who do support you pretty much with whatever you do, but there's always going to be those outliers that are like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me know when, whatever it is. So
a lot of that also comes from, there are going to be people around you who really care about you, who are trying to get you to do something else because they care about you.
Right.
Because they don't want to see you wasting their time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the hardest. Those are the hardest people to deal with, because you can't ignore them, because they're very important people to you. And also they really care about you and they're really trying to help. And so you need to be able to deal with that kind of thing. And I don't really have any tips other than just, saying, okay, thank you.
Right. We're fortunate to be in a pretty supportive atmosphere for most people. Even the people, though, that I know support, for sure doubt, Yeah,
100%.
100%. There's always that, you have friends and family who are excited about what you're doing, and, willing to help and whatever that might be. But when it comes down to the end of the day of you're not paying yourself or whatever that is, there's always that doubt there, and the truth is it's always in the back of my mind too.
Yeah.
Never have I ever thought this business is perfect. We are nowhere near that.
No.
So, we have that doubt as well. But, I think the important thing is that if no one around you at all is okay with what you're doing and they don't believe in what you're doing, and they're usually really supportive people, then maybe you should take that and really reevaluate, because then maybe you have a problem. But
yeah,
if there's that support and then that little bit of doubt, that's going to be totally normal. I don't think you'll ever find anyone who's 100% supportive, who is 100% supported with all their people around them. I'm sure occasionally you do, but it's probably not especially in those times where it's tough, because I don't
totally,
I'm sure every single business has during growth is there's those moments of, this is bad.
And something piggybacking off of what you said about listening to people is, if someone does ever actually admit that they don't think it's going to work, ask them why, and not to try and prove them wrong, because they might bring up an extremely valuable point where you're like, oh, that's a very legitimate reason.
Right. I didn't even think of that.
Or they might bring up something where you're like, oh, that's a problem and I can fix it preventatively now.
Mm-hmm.
And so don't just get mad at people who say no, actually listen, because that's good. That's a very valuable asset. They're going to predict something potentially.
Yeah. So another question I think to ask yourself when you're trying to figure out if you want to start a small business, which somewhat goes on alongside the financial one, is potentially, are you willing to work more in the next coming months that you're starting your business than you are currently? Most people in a job that they have now are not working 80 hours a week. The majority, some people do obviously, but for the most part, you're not working 80 hours in a week. If you start a business and you decide, I'm going to quit my job, tomorrow I'm quitting and I'm starting my business at the same time, very unlikely that you're going to be able to just work your 35, 40 hours a week, maybe 45 or whatever that you have been working at your normal job, or your day job before you quit it. Very unlikely you're going to be able to just do those 35 to 45 hours in your new business. You're probably going to have to do a lot more than that. Or if you're in a financial position where you can't quit your job and continue, or you can't quit your job and just start with a business, and you need to continue working at your normal job and do your business together, now you're looking at working easily 80 hours a week if you're trying to do full time at both of those jobs. So big question, are you willing to work more than you're working right now? And are you willing to work a lot more for most likely a lot less pay, or potentially no pay, just, maybe running off savings, or just a lot less, just barely meeting your expenses for a few months just so you can really get off the ground. And if you're not willing to take that risk, or yourself and you can't do 80 hours a week, then I'd say, unless you have a business partner or someone who can fill in that extra space, you're going to have a little bit of potentially a struggle when it comes to starting a business, especially for the high intensity labor businesses. Actually, not even high intensity, but I would consider ourselves one of those where the labor itself is not intense, but there are so many little things that have to be done. We're a very hands-on business versus like a software type thing where you can work at 2 a.m. and we could technically do that, I guess, but it's ours is slightly less flexible than a single person run business doing whatever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want. Totally. We have a location and all that stuff.
This is not a digital nomad
right
job.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're willing to quit your job and stuff, just expect to have to work more. Hopefully not forever, but it's very unlikely that you'll be working less. So definitely a question to ask yourself when you're doing it. Another topic, or another question that you might want to ask yourself, And this is Paul's thing. Actually, I'll let you do this one.
Okay. So what in your life are you willing to give up to make this work? And what are you not willing to give up? Because you shouldn't give up everything. So, there might be YouTube business gurus out there who, are saying, oh, you need to work the 120-hour work week. You need to throw away everything, leave your marriage, et cetera, et cetera. No. Because what is the point of making all of that money? I guess it's what's that meme? The real friends we made along the way, right? And so you need to ask yourself, because you're going to have to make sacrifices, and you're going to have to decide to give up some things that you enjoy simply because you don't have time or you don't have money anymore. And you need to pick a line in the sand and say, if I ever have to give up this, then it's not worth it. Because otherwise, you might get sucked down into a situation that you can't recover from. And it might be, if I have to inject more money more than 2 years after I start, then the business isn't worth it. That's potentially a bad one. But, if I have to skip date night with my girlfriend more than once every 2 months, then then this is taking too much of my time, or family game night or church or whatever it is that's super important to you. If you have to give that up, then that's where you decide it's not worth it. But the counter to that is you also then need to kind of go down your list of everything that you do and everything that you enjoy. And this is something that I actually did do, is I wrote down all my hobbies, because I have a lot of hobbies, as Evan knows. And I have a lot of things that I love learning. I love reading. I love building things. And I rated them all out of 5. And I'm like,
oh, really?
Yeah. So something that's a 5 means I am not willing to sacrifice doing that for just a brick in the bucket, like period ever. There's almost no 5s. 4 means that I'm willing to sacrifice it occasionally if there's something really urgent that specifically has to be done in the moment. Right. So like, oh, I can just do this hobby tomorrow instead. Right. And 1s just immediately got dropped. I don't do 1s anymore. And 2s got dropped.
What were examples of 1s?
Like, it was working on the server rack. I dropped that because I was like, this is costing me so much money. And I had like an IT hobby where I was literally building like a whole networking and server rack in the closet, and it's still there, but I dropped that for now. And other hobbies might include getting more reptiles, that got dropped.
Good.
Some MMOs. I used to be a huge MMO player. Like basically a full-time job MMO player level of hours, and I dropped that like years ago. But things like that got dropped. There weren't that many 1s. 2s get dropped to put on a list as something that I still would one day like to return to. And then 3s are things that I can kind of do when I have a moment, like gaming. Occasionally I still do that, but it's not something that I work into my schedule, right? And rating everything out of 5 like that gave me the ability to say, okay, here is where Just a Brick in the Bucket is, right? Just a Brick in the Bucket is somewhere between 4 and 5, right? And then I can orientate my entire schedule around Just a Brick in the Bucket, because that's my business. That's the most, almost the most important thing, but not quite the most important thing. And so make a list of what you're willing to give up, because when it comes down to the wire, then in reality, I'm willing to give up everything up to a 4, right? Because if there's a period of time, like a month, 2 months, 3 months even, where I just have to get this done, when it comes down to it, I know what my decision is going to be. And having that list ahead of time is going to save you a lot of psychological strain.
I don't know if I could make a list like that, to be honest. I don't think I could do that. It just like, maybe I could, but it'd be hard. That'd be a challenge.
It was very hard, because
I don't know if that's a healthy thing to do either. Because like, there are those moments where mentally, let's say you're at you put a task at a 5, like no, you put a task at a 4,
Okay.
Because you have that feeling of that pressure that you need to work in the business, and your business between 4 and 5 or whatever. So you put something at a 4, but mentally you need that.
Then in reality it's a 5.
Right, but I don't know that everyone can distinguish that. Like there's probably a lot of things that are a 4 that you don't realize you need until you don't have that thing for 6 months because you wrote it on a list and told yourself don't do that.
Yeah, that'd be very true, but I would say, I mean,
if it works for you, I'd say that's perfect. Great, obviously.
Yeah. And the real point I was trying to drive at here is, as much as you can, figure out what your priorities are before you get started, so that way you don't have to waste stress on shaving off certain things that you kind of already know you might have to give up.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So you don't grieve over your hobbies. And it'll also provide you with an idea, kind of what you're saying, of some of the things that you now know you can't live without. Mm-hmm. For me, sleep is a 5. And Evan knows this. There have been, actually, sleep is a very, very high 4, because there was one time, a business trip we made, where I gave up my sleep. But I am just absolutely objectively unable to function without like at least 7 hours of sleep. I'm a complete and absolute disaster. And so for me, that's where my limit is. I'll give up everything else except sleep, because without sleeping well, I can't get anything done. So that's kind of, which you can get through a lot of time with sleeping very little, right? So that's where our priorities might be different.
Right.
And so that's more what I'm trying to get at here is.
That's another thing though that's on our list that we haven't talked about. Like, what are you willing to give up in your life? Really, your health should not be on the list of what you're willing to give up. It is for sure on my list. It really is on your list too sometimes.
Yeah, I stopped working out in order to focus on just breaking the bucket, and I don't want to stand up and shake my belly because it's a little unprofessional, but
well, and all the people listening wouldn't be able to see that, so it's not fair.
Yeah, that's true. But
but like there is like, to an extent, your health, like I'm not long term willing to like go without eating and sleeping and whatever, but for periods of time, for sure. Like, absolutely. I'll make that thing where I got to get up at 4 a.m. to go on a meeting or whatever, or I stay up all night because something needs to get done or whatever it is. But if that was a reoccurring thing and I'm working 100 hours a week at just a brick in the bucket and I don't have time to eat, I don't have time to sleep like I need to, long term, that'd be really bad.
My microwave meal problem.
Yeah.
I live off of microwavable TV dinners every meal. Occasionally I eat with my parents, but almost everything is microwavable TV dinners because I simply don't have time to cook. Now, I do pick, for those of you listening, I'm doing air quotes here, healthy ones, right? It's not like recently I got a thing of Hot Pockets for nostalgia, but that's very rare. I normally don't eat Hot Pockets.
I will say, though, somehow I find the time to cook.
I don't know how.
Neither do I, but that does mean you can probably find some time to cook. Because even just getting a chicken breast, putting salt and pepper on it, and putting it in the oven with asparagus or something that you pour on a sheet tray, you're really not doing a lot of actual time. The cook time is longer than 4 minutes in the microwave. It's like maybe 20 minutes in the oven. But at the end of the day, the real time is maybe 5 minutes more in terms of prep.
I mean, for me, it's more all of the prep and shopping and coming up with a meal plan. That's where the time is. It's not really in the cooking. It's in the preparation of the scheduling of everything, because then I got to carve out like an hour on Sunday, right, to work on that and, shop and everything. Because then I got to spend the money to order on Amazon Fresh. Amazon Fresh ain't cheap.
I very often, like, 5:30, 6 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock at night, whatever it is, I'm like, I'm going to run to the store real quick. And I walk in for 5 minutes or so and I grab whatever I need, and then I come home and then I cook it. And, usually I'm watching something on YouTube while I'm doing that, or maybe I'm in the middle of editing a video, or while it's in the oven, I go in the garage and I part something out, or no, don't part something out. We don't part things out, but you know what I mean? I don't think it takes too much time. But yeah, sorry, this was all about we don't need to go on about this. There's no reason to. But, what are you willing to give up? Are you going to listen to your Here's the thing, like if it's causing strain between you and your friends and your family, you need to figure out how to not let it cause strain. And a lot of that might be give up some time at the business. If it's ruining your relationships and stuff, that's not worth it. If it's really ruining your health, that is not worth it either. Mm-hmm. If it's ruining your mental health because you don't have enough free time or you can't do the things that you need to mentally do in order to relax or whatever, that's also not worth it. So there's obviously a lot of things that are not worth it. But there needs to, the list is interesting actually, of kind of prioritizing what am I able to give up and what am I not able to give up. And you know, you're assigning a number is actually something where you kind of have a solid list now of can't do this because it doesn't make sense to do that.
I have been wrong. You brought up being wrong on the list. There have been things that I have given up or things that I've said I couldn't that I actually could, and it wasn't even an issue.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that makes sense because it's probably incredibly difficult to actually say I don't need this or whatever. Yeah. So yeah, and then you shift things around, I assume, as you realize.
Yeah. And you know,
and like there's days where, of course, you say like, hey, Evan, you worked in the morning and you're like, I have to be out this afternoon because I really have to do this. Yeah. So of course, you can't follow that to a T.
Exactly.
But it's a good outline, I guess. Yeah. I think the final thing on our list, unless there's anything else that you kind of or we brushed over that maybe we didn't talk about, is potentially, it's difficult, especially after you've put in a lot of time and energy and probably money, but really determining and understanding, do you have the ability to let it go? Mm-hmm. If the business is not working? Do you have can you say, we have to be done because, we've had a good run. It's been 3.5 years. It's been really fun. We've whatever, but it just doesn't make sense to do this.
Why'd you pick almost the exact amount of time we've been operating?
I was actually going to go further into us, but I didn't. But that needs to be a thing that you really decide on. Paul and I have for things have put deadlines on stuff where it's like, if we don't do this by this day, let's have a serious talk. If something's not done by March, let's have a talk and really is this worth it or should we throw it away? Like, you need to be willing to do that. We've definitely put deadlines on things, and we actually find that putting that deadline on something and then telling ourselves, if we do not accomplish this goal by this deadline, or if we spent this much money on this and we don't see a return by this day, we need to call it. And that I think lights a fire under us to an extent as well.
Totally. And those are real deadlines. We've talked before about setting unreasonable goals. When we're talking about something where it's like, if we don't hit this, then the company needs to shutter. That's a real deadline where we're saying like, this is the maximum amount of time that we can, afford.
Especially when there's an investment put into things, and you've put money into it or a lot of time or whatever, and you really have to tell yourself, as much as I love this and I'm so passionate about this and whatever, at the end of the day, we spent $60,000, random number, but it doesn't make sense. Like, we will not make $60,000 on the next 3 years on this thing or whatever. So it doesn't make sense to continue. And that's a sad thing that, I think we've been really fortunate where we
haven't actually had to
rarely
call
have
much.
we pulled anything.
Yeah.
We do have some stuff coming up. We'll see. But for the most part, we've been lucky where we haven't had that issue. And that's just partially also in the beginning picking whether something you're choosing to do is a good idea or not. And there's techniques that you can definitely use in the beginning to determine whether or not.
Before we jump into that, though, I do think one thing about letting go is this is a question you need to ask yourself. If you're going to become so emotionally invested in this that you need this business for your mental health, then I'm just going to be honest here. You should not run this business because it's going to be better off as a hobby for you. Because think about it. I'm not talking about finances, because you might end up in a situation where you need the business for your financial well-being because it has been successful. So that's why I'm specifically saying mental health.
And that's where you wouldn't be able to let it go. Most likely, and then it's hurting.
But then hopefully you could find another job. But if you destroy your mental health, you may not be able to come back from that.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm saying, like, if you know your personality is the kind of person who, if you fail, you won't either be able to deal with the shame, I'm doing air quotes again, shame of failure, or you just will think of yourself as a failure, and you just know that you're not going to come back from that, because it is okay to grieve over losing a business, right? Especially if it's something you put years and tens of thousands of dollars into.
Yeah.
It's like losing a family member, right? But at the end of the day, just like losing a family member, after you've grieved, you can still think affectionately about it, but you have to be able to move on. And so if you as a person are not going to be able to do that, then really, being honest, you probably should not start that business. Doesn't mean you can't start a business with something else, because it might be that idea, your cabinets, the thing is you can continue making cabinets as a hobby, even if your business flops, right? So that's something else to be aware of there.
Yeah, you could remodel your kitchen every year if you want.
You need a bit of money to do that, but yeah. I guess if you're doing it yourself, it's a little cheaper.
Yeah. But yeah, in terms of picking something that, and setting that deadline, there's a little bit you can do to kind of pick or determine if what you're doing is potentially a good idea. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of tools, and hopefully one day some of these will get their own episodes. But just to kind of run down the list and provide a little bit, something that they teach in I would hope every business school is this thing called a SWOT chart, SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Mm-hmm. And it's a fantastic tool. You can put anything in your entire life into a SWOT chart. And basically you assess all of your internal strength, you assess all of your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats on both the internal and external level. And you do it immediately, and then you do a prediction in 5 years, or an arbitrary bracket of time, depending on what you want. But you basically try and break it out. Each point needs to be a concrete, definite that you have. For strengths, it needs to be something that you already possess and a realizable asset. For weaknesses, it needs to be something that you can control and change, and already exists and is known, right? You can't say, although not knowing your weaknesses can be a weakness, but it basically needs to be something that you can take action on. If you can't take action and walk away with a plan to correct it, then it doesn't really belong here, right? Or walk away with the knowledge that this is fundamentally incorrectable. Like if you are severely handicapped in some capacity, you might not be able to grow, an appendage, but you at least then can go ahead and say, here are the accessibility steps that I can take to mitigate this weakness to the best of my capability.
Right. And if that's a weakness that destroys your business and long term it can't stand, then that's part of what this is. Obviously, you'll talk about opportunities and threats in a minute, but if you have a weakness that you realize is going to shutter this business in the next 2 years because it just can't sustain itself, then that's something you should look into at the beginning and decide maybe this isn't a good idea to just go all in on or whatever.
Yeah. Opportunities is going to be, most SWOT charts I see this only deal with external opportunities, but personally I think internal opportunities also need to be listed a lot, which is basically upcoming things that are not quite here yet that you need to seize on in order to strengthen your business. So this might be that a competitor is showing signs of going under, or as simple as my supply is going to be dropping or in price, or tech companies are letting a lot of people go right now. And as a growing tech company, I suspect that there's going to be lots of cheap labor available in the pool. That's very relevant to what's going on right now. And that's where you put that kind of stuff. And then in the 5-year arbitrary time column, you kind of look at, once again, what opportunities you project are going to be available in an arbitrary amount of time. And you really should go deep into this, because the next step after the SWOT chart is going to be to figure out an action plan for how to actually deal with every single item on this chart. And then the threats category is going to be basically things that you might be able to influence that are negative towards you, but not things that you started. If you started it, then it usually would go into a weakness. But it's basically, there's a competitor that's growing rapidly. You can do something about that, but only indirectly, right?
Yeah.
And so,
or there's a recession coming like now.
Yeah. And So you're going to write down everything that could potentially be a threat to you. And once again, these need to be concrete, complete sentence, factoids that you can back up with research and empirical evidence, right? This is not supposed to be something where you feel about this. This is supposed to be something that is actionable intelligence. And based off of the SWOT chart, you can then look at your strengths and see how they match up to your threats and see whether your strengths are able to compensate for your threats. And you can look at your weaknesses and your opportunities and see whether or not the opportunities that are coming up are going to be able to mitigate your weaknesses. And based off of that, you can kind of create a basic outline and matchup of how to proceed. And you can drill this down really far. You can make a SWOT for your whole business, going out to the most extreme level, or you can literally look at a specific decision about whether or not I should work with this supplier.
Yeah, or you want to develop a new product.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's like a business venture within the business is usually smart to really look into and to do that research on and determine, okay, is this a good idea? Is it a bad idea? What are the strengths? All that kind of stuff. It doesn't just need to be your whole business, because obviously as a business, ideally most businesses would not be a single product company. Mm-hmm. Some are, and that's what they start as, and then they branch out. But if you create a product that makes $50 million in sales in a year, but then you invest $40 million in R&D to create a product that you didn't do any research on and is not going to work, then you've probably just wasted $40 million and now you're negative or whatever. Where you could have done some sort of analysis and figured out if this potentially could be a good idea versus you just having the gut random feeling with no evidence behind it. And
there are other similar things. I think there is like an internal external goal chart. There's like a 5-point plan. There's like a whole bunch of very similar things. I think there's a version of the SWOT chart where they replace opportunities and threats with perceptions and intuitions, where it's basically supposed to be, here are the things that I've noticed are going on. It was on a list I looked up before we were doing this. I'd never heard of it, but it sounded kind of interesting. So yeah, there's a whole bunch. If you go and look, there's also, if you basically just look up any business textbook, I'm sure I'm sure there's a whole bunch of things.
But another thing is, like, you don't have to do just do whatever works for you. And I guess technically, if you really don't want to, you don't have to. But it's a good idea to have an understanding of potentially where this thing could go versus just saying, let's do it because you want to.
Yeah.
Not that we have done this for everything.
No,
obviously.
A lot of things we just go with our gut.
Yeah.
But the SWOT chart can be done pretty quickly, and it can kind of just give you a basic gut feeling, or basically give you an intuition as to whether I should do more research or it's not worth my time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the next step would be kind of making a 5-year plan. There's a statistic that floats around that most businesses take about 5 years to grow. I don't actually know where the original source is for that, but it's something I've heard from a lot of people. I don't think it's 5
years to grow. I think it's usually 5 years before it's profitable.
Okay, 5 years before it's profitable. Do you know where that source actually comes from?
No.
Okay.
It's a good question.
And
I'm sure that's an average. I'm sure it's not like at 5 years you have to be profitable or it's just a failure. I'm sure a lot of businesses in 2 years are profitable. I think that's just usually the initial investment, most likely, finally pays itself off by that 5-year mark, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. So
we can look into that
making
more.
a 5-year plan as to where you want to be, and you don't need to. So like your next month, bullet point out really, really well. A year, bullet point out pretty darn well, and then after that point, just kind of goals and a bit more vague, right? Don't waste all your time because the plan is not going to work.
Right. Something's going to change, and if you are able to predict your 5 years spot on, you are incredible.
Yeah.
We've done it, but same thing where we say, like, this month, this is what we're going to do.
Not that we've been totally accurate.
No, not at all. That's what I was getting at.
Okay.
We're not accurate at all. But like this next month, this is what we're going to do in the first or the next year, hopefully this. And then we've built out a 5-year like goals essentially. But that's really all it is like in 5 years, let's hope that we're doing this. because this is what we expect. It's not like it's not like it's bullet pointed out. We're going to make this exact amount from this, and then we're going to be doing this at that point. And things change all the time. So, 2 months down the road, it's changed, and we've decided, okay, we're actually not going to do this now. So technically that means our 5-year plan's inaccurate because we made this other decision.
And also keep in mind the old adage, everything runs 20% over time and 20% more expensive. So
we have found that to be incredibly accurate.
Sorry, not incredibly inaccurate.
Sorry, not accurate in the sense of it's 20%, but like incredibly accurate where it always takes more time and it always is over budget.
Yeah. So you really should actually you should be accounting for the fact that you're going to expend more time and money when you're setting your deadlines, because you really need to know what like the real deadline is, not what your best case deadline
is. And obviously if you have experience doing this kind of stuff at a job, we're still very young.
Yeah.
We're not in our 40s or 50s or anything where we have had half of a lifetime of experience managing projects and all these other things. So we're also kind of just like going off what we hope and stuff. So obviously we're learning a lot too, but
it's taken a little bit not to panic when something is running over time and over money, because when we first kind of sat down to do deadlines and stuff, every time something would be late, we'd be like, oh, this is awful. Oh no, right. Everything's not going to work. And now, not that we're complacent, but we kind of have an understanding that
stuff happens all the time. We expect this when it happens, and it's not, as long as it's not like 100% over time or 100% over budget.
In which case, there
have been a couple things, of course, but there are certain things where it's like it makes, we expect this to happen in a month, and then it takes 6 weeks instead of a month.
The contractors thing, our contractor game plan was just about 20%.
Yeah, that happened to be. But yeah, no, we've learned that everything generally takes longer and generally is more expensive.
And so the next thing is making a vision statement, which is kind of just a brief summary of where you see yourself being and what it is that you're here to accomplish. And
that's something you really need to do at the beginning of your business.
Yeah. And that is a useful tool, because if you think about it critically, rather than just writing out some nonsense statement that, sounds good and looks good on a poster, but if you actually think about like, why am I here? What am I trying to do? And how am I going to benefit the community that I'm in? Whether that's a physical community or an economic community. And then lastly, there's lots of resources like this called SCORE. I don't know if it's just a California thing or not, but there are probably ones other. I feel like the C stands for that, but it's a nonprofit that is made up of entrepreneurs and people who have had businesses.
Yeah, score.org, SCORE.org. I don't think it's California. I think it's
okay, and they can help with providing advice. They can help you with not funding or anything like that, but they can kind of match you up with someone who is a retired entrepreneur who worked in kind of a similar field and can provide you with some advice.
Almost like a mentorship type thing.
Yeah, I think they actually do call it a mentorship thing. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help. So if that's something and you want to know whether your business idea is good, give them a call.
Yeah,
and
talk to people.
Ask someone who actually has started potentially many businesses and actually knows what they're talking about, not your neighbor who, sold some things on eBay. But someone who can just say, because if you ask 5 SCORE mentors or whatever, and they all say, I wouldn't do this, then that's some serious food for thought, versus if your family or your neighbors or your friends say, I wouldn't do that, right? Because they're going to be way more educated. So that's kind of my last tool. There are obviously so many more. You should budget, but I feel like budgeting is going to be its whole own episode at some point.
We can probably do a whole thing on that, just in terms of the way to lay it out, and hopefully figure out how to budget.
Just use every available asset. And I guess if I really had to drill it down here, at the end of the day, you have to take a risk. Just don't take any risks you can't recover from.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you take a risk and it doesn't pan out, that does not mean that your whole business is a failure. That might mean just whatever you tried in one way was a failure. So don't get discouraged too if one thing doesn't work. if we stopped after one thing didn't work, we wouldn't have lasted a year. So definitely keep trying and stuff, as long as it's not costing you way more money or whatever than it potentially could pay out for. So, but obviously you do need to understand that risk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much it for this episode. Hopefully this can, for people who are potentially wondering if they should start a small business. Obviously a lot of people who talk and listen to us are looking if it's specifically, can I start a BrickLink store or something like that? But I think really what we talked about today has nothing to do with specifically that. It could really be any business. So, hopefully if these are good food for thought questions that you can ask yourself and hopefully determine some answers on if you're interested in starting something.
And we are looking for topic suggestions.
Yes.
So if you have a topic that you want covered that is general business, so not how do I start a BrickLink store or BrickLink, related, how do I upload pieces? But if you have a question that's fundamental to how to run a business, or, if you have a story that you think could inspire us to come up with an idea for an episode, please do not hesitate to leave a comment, because we do look through them about 20 minutes before we're going to start an episode.
It's a couple hours.
Yeah, it's a couple hours. But
yeah, let us know what you want to hear us talk about in terms of running a business, or obviously we have experience running our business. So let us know. It'd be very helpful, and we would love to answer those questions. With that being said, I think that's pretty much it. So as always, thank you very much for watching or listening. If you are watching, you can listen to this on your favorite podcast platform. And if you are listening and you want to get involved, you can go over to our YouTube channel, Just a Brick in the Bucket, and find this episode and comment there if you have ideas or suggestions. And if you're listening, a rating always helps us out on any platform. So Thank you very much. We will see you next time in episode 7 of BrickSide Chat.
See ya.